Well, a very good evening all, everybody. Welcome to this question time here at Glossopdale School. My name is Michael Taylor. I'm going to be your host for the next hour, where you'll be hearing from your 4 parliamentary candidates in this general election hustings here in Glossop for the High Peak constituency. I'll be introducing the candidates in just a moment, but I just want to let you all know as well that for transparency, tonight's hustings is being recorded by the team here at Tameside Radio to be broadcast live on Facebook Live, and it will be available later on a podcast. And we are doing, if you're interested, if you're real political anoraks like me, you might want to come along to some of the other hustings that we'll be running through the Quest Media Group, publishers of the Glossop Chronicle. Also our sister newspaper in Tameside will also be running hustings in the Ashton constituency and in the Stalybridge and Hyde constituency just down the road. So look out for those if you want to come along for a little bit more political action. So we've had lots of questions submitted by you, the audience, in your registration to come along for tonight's event. But what I want to do, first of all, is ask each of the candidates to introduce themselves. And we'll start with Robert, the Green Party candidate. What I don't want tonight is lots of grandstanding big speeches. I want it for you, the candidates, to have a conversation with your community, with the people who've come out on this bitterly cold night here in Glossop, and to have a conversation with them, for them to get to know you a little bit better and to speak about the issues as you see them in this general election campaign. I will be quite tight on time if I believe that people are going over a 2 minutes, I think, maximum, really, for answering questions. So try and be succinct. We've had loads of questions submitted. We've got a lot to get through. There are big issues in this election. The NHS, the economy, Brexit, of course. And I ought to point out at this stage as well, there is an empty chair in the middle of this hustings event tonight. Unfortunately, the Brexit Party candidate didn't want to appear and take part in the debate. So, without further ado, let's get on with the debate for the candidates who are here. So please give a very warm welcome to Robert Hodgett-Haley, the Green Party candidate.
Brexit is not important. The thing that we are facing globally is. The climate crisis is one of the things that the next generation and the generations to come are going to have to face. We owe this planet a debt, and the Green Party seem to be the only party that are prepared to put the money down and pay this debt in a time that we can afford to do so. We've basically said that we need to put 100 billion down. Now, that isn't an investment, that is a debt that we owe to this planet. And that is why I am standing for the Green Party, because I believe that these other parties are trying to act like the Green Party light, and that isn't good enough. Now, we live in a society where it costs to be green. It is completely unaffordable for the majority of citizens. That is why we need to change our system. Constant growth in our economy is unsustainable. The UK is currently using twice the amount of resources that it can sustainably do so. We need to invest in sustainability. We need a sustainable economy, sustainable politics, so that we can have a sustainable future where we can continue to exist. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. May I ask Ruth George, the Labour Party candidate, for her opening statement?
Thank you very much. And I was absolutely honoured when High Peak voted for me as your Member of Parliament 2.5 years ago, against the odds, as someone who is a local mom who'd done lots of campaigning across the constituency, on schools, on grammar schools, on building on our greenfield sites, setting up Protect High Peak with others in the constituency, and trying to make sure that the policies that were affecting us were ones that we could influence, not with an MP who was remote and didn't listen to us. So since then, I've spent my time going round the constituency, in Parliament as little as possible, in High Peak as much as possible, listening to you, taking up every concern that people have raised with me, be it the extra places here at Glossopdale School, be it the need for not just the Mottram bypass, but for Tintwistle as well, because that is crucial to actually solving the traffic problems within Glossop, fighting for the station at Gamesley, and making sure that Transport for Greater Manchester have got that as a strategic priority, and actually taking the actions that the people of Glossop want your MP to be doing.
Thank you very much. David Lomax, the Liberal Democrat candidate.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, a bit of information about me. I've lived in High Peak since 1977. I came here to start teaching and remained in Whaley Bridge for most of that time, teaching there, and then at New Mills as head of special needs at the secondary school there. I've been a borough councillor since 1991, so I know a lot of the problems that High Peak has. As Ruth says, we have problems with the A6 and the Mottram bypass. Air pollution, great problem for people who live on those. The amount of traffic, great problem for the people who live there. Housing developments coming across the whole of High Peak. We're told how many houses we have to have rather than how many we think we should really be having. Our schools are underfunded. If we want health provision, we struggle to actually get an appointment. And if you do get an appointment, then you might be waiting for the care if you need to go to hospital for appointments down there. We need a greater investment. As Robert says, this election is far more important than just Brexit. We need to ensure that we actually have the services that High Peak and this country deserves.
Thank you. Robert Largan, the Conservative Party candidate.
Good evening. I live locally in Glossop on the main road, and if I was elected, I would be the first MP to live in either Glossop or Hadfield since 1929. Now, let's be honest, the last few years of politics have been pretty rubbish. We've had nothing but going round in circles, division, squabbling, indecision, and uncertainty. And we need to get Brexit resolved. And we need to get it resolved, one, so that we can deliver on what people voted for in 2016, and two, so that we can reunite the country after the last 3.5 years of division, and three, so that we can get tackling the big issues that really do matter here. Things like building the bypass, delivering a new urgent care centre at Tameside Hospital, getting more good local school places, standing up for our small businesses and our market traders at Glossop Town Hall, and tackling things like climate change. But first of all, we've got to get Brexit resolved. And that means that we need to get a decisive result for this election. I hope that you can lend me your vote on the 12th of December. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We've heard from all the candidates now. I'm now going to throw it open to you, the audience. You all submitted questions, or most of you submitted questions beforehand. And I'm going to take the first question from Nadia Hall. Nadia, are you here? Fantastic. Down here in the second row, if you could bring your microphone.
Okay, I don't exactly remember the specifics of my question, but, we have it here. Thank you so much. In-work poverty and homelessness are rising, and our public services are struggling to cope. Wages have stagnated and economic growth is slow. Have we actually got a strong economy, as some would like to claim, and was austerity worth the toll it has taken on the British people?
Okay. Now, I'm going to ask each of the candidates to answer that question, and I'm going to start with Robert, the Conservative candidate. Was austerity worth it?
Look, the last 9 years have been very difficult, there's no denying that. But let's look at the facts. There are 400,000 fewer people living in absolute poverty in this country than there were in 2010. We have record high employment. We have the lowest unemployment since the early 1970s. We've gone from a budget deficit, which was absolutely enormous, down to only 1%. We've made huge progress. Has it taken longer than we've wanted? Of course it has. Has it been difficult? Yes. But the only way that we're going to go forward, properly funding our public services in future, is if we keep a strong and growing economy. And that requires a credible government. That requires serious economic thinking. And let's consider the Labour manifesto, which is before us. The IFS, the independent IFS, have said it's simply not credible that those on average incomes would have to pay more tax. It would lead to the biggest increase in our public debt in many generations. So, yes, things have been difficult, but we have a very serious choice ahead of us. And the government does need to do more. This is why I'm supporting an increase in the minimum wage to £10.50 an hour. It's why we've taken the lowest paid out of income tax altogether, and we're proposing to raise the national insurance threshold to cut tax more for those on the lowest incomes. These are just a few of the things that we need to do. We also need to give better pay to our teachers, to our nurses, to our midwives and to our doctors. These are things that are desperately needed, but we can only afford to pay for them. We can only afford these things if we have a growing economy. And simply, the choice before you is, who do you trust to deliver that? Is it going to be us, or is it going to be that Labour manifesto, which is just not credible?
Thank you. David Lomax.
Thank you. Well, I'll get in before Ruth does and says, interesting that you quote that the Labour manifesto isn't credible from the Institute of Fiscal Studies, because I think they said exactly the same about yours as well.
Yeah.
United Kingdom is the 5th largest economy in the world as a country, and it's an embarrassment that we actually have food banks, a growing number of food banks. It's an embarrassment that we are becoming a lower wage economy, that we have 0 hours contracts, that our public services are struggling, whether it be schools, hospitals, as I said before. Has austerity been worth it? Probably not. Probably not, is the honest answer. But then again, we do have a base where we can work from. And as Liberal Democrats, we want to ensure that whatever's gone on over the last 9 years, we can build on it. Institute of Fiscal Studies had some criticisms of our manifesto, saying some of our bits that we put in there perhaps aren't real, or we should be looking at them again. But as a whole, our costed plans for the future were generally okay. We need to invest in our schools as the first place. We need to have a better educated workforce. We need to cut 0 hours contracts, and where 0 hours contracts still exist, we need to ensure that they have a higher minimum wage than the actual minimum wage we'd set up, working wage. We certainly need to encourage people to come into this country to fill the gaps that we have in our services, and to try and get rid of EU citizens, force them out, or to tax them if we want them to come in and work in our hospitals is absolutely crazy. We will be investing in the future because it is so important that we do invest in our future.
Thank you very much. Ruth George.
Thank you very much. If you're saying, is austerity worth the toll, then the question really is the toll on whom? And if you're one of the top-rate taxpayers that had your tax cut back in 2011, if you're a major corporation like I used to work with at the Shop Workers Union in Tesco, who saw their corporation tax cut by £500 million a year, that's great. What was that company putting back into wages? Just a fifth of that amount they had in tax cut were they giving to wage negotiations, and they were still cutting jobs and they were still cutting staff. So for those people, yes, austerity, great. What the rest of us have seen, what people on low wages have seen those wages drop since 2008. They're worth less in real terms. We can see in Glossop the food banks all around us. I visit them regularly, both in Hadfield, in Gamesley, in Whitfield and in Glossop itself. Thousands of people in our local area, in the 5th, although dropping to 7th, biggest economy in the world, then we are seeing thousands of people, particularly children, particularly disabled people, single parents, and people on low pay as well, having to ask for handouts simply to afford to eat. Most of those people go hungry before they dare to go and set foot in a food bank and ask for help. That is an absolute disgrace. We can afford this. I met the IFS just before Parliament finished, they looked at the financial plans for the budget and they said what the government should have been doing over the last 9 years is borrowing whilst money is cheap and investing in our productivity, investing in our infrastructure so that our people can get to work quicker. We don't have the longest journey times and commuter times in Europe, and we can have better productivity, better economic growth and real wages rising. That is what we need to do. We've got to do it as a party and as a country now to make this a better country for everyone.
Robert.
Swapping financial debt for a social debt is completely unacceptable. If you want to kill an economy in the future, what you need to do is you need to take away our educational quality by underfunding it. You need to kill health by underfunding things like the NHS. And this is a burden on society that is a greater debt. And the more you don't invest back into the system, the greater the debt grows. And as you see, I believe austerity doesn't seem to have closed this gap at all. All it has done is just forced bad situations on the poorest in society. That is unacceptable. We're meant to be a great country, but if we're not supporting those who are in need, it's just not acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not going to get any supplementary questions because we've got so many different issues to come through, and I think there's been a very thorough airing of the issues on economic management. I think one of the big issues in this election, both in all of the manifestos, has been the National Health Service, and I'd like to invite Ian Shankland to ask his question. Ian is in the second row. Can you recall your question, Ian?
Yes.
And can I have my sheet back with the questions on?
All the main parties have made promises to increase staff in the National Health Service and increase their budget, etc. But I'd be interested to hear the detailed plans, if you have any. If you really mean it, you obviously must have a plan to say how you're going to recruit this staff, how you're going to attract them into the country, how you're going to fund the training of them. I haven't heard any real detail on that from anyone. So I'd really like to hear that from each of you. Thank you.
Can I just ask you, do you work in the NHS?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I'm actually retired.
Okay. Well, you look younger. Yeah, fantastic. I've got a system for this, so I'm going to ask David Lomax to have the first response to that question from Ian Shankland.
Right, as you rightly say, I mean, it's all very well as having these plans of what we're going to do, but if we can't get the staff to actually do it, then those plans can't take place. And if you want a doctor or a nurse, then you really need time to bring those people in to train them in the first place. A doctor, you're talking about 5-7 years. So that's going to be a long-term plan if we're going to find doctors in our own country. It's a shame that we haven't produced the number of doctors and nurses over the last few years that we should have been doing. And we have relied on people from abroad. We would obviously be encouraging people to come from countries to work in our NHS. The problem is, of course, if you're taking people from other countries, are you making them suffer because they are losing their doctors and nurses? So you have to be very careful about where you're taking people in from as well. You can't just suddenly say, yes, we'll take the whole doctors from a certain country, come and work here because the conditions and pay are far better than you have in your own country. So you have to be realistic. But what we wouldn't be saying, as the Tories are saying, yes, please come and be a nurse here, and we're going to charge you £2,000 for the pleasure of coming to work here, through the taxes you're going to have to pay and the visa arrangements you're going to have to pay. We want to be an encouraging country to ask people to come and work for our benefit. So that's what we'd be doing in the short place. In the longer term, we'd be ensuring that we have more medical places to train and make sure that working in the NHS is something that people want to do, that they will feel valued when they are working there, and they will feel they want to stay in that profession rather than being so demoralised after a short period of time because they find it is so badly funded by the government.
Thank you very much. Ruth George.
Thank you. And Ian, the best way to keep the costs down in our National Health Service is to invest in primary care and in people staying healthy before they get to a condition of ill health. And that's why the Labour Party will be investing in public health. We'll be investing in the social care that we so desperately need, that's seeing beds blocked at the moment at Stepping Hill, where the emergency care is overflowing because they've got beds that are taken up by people who should be in social care. We can recruit social carers if we give them decent employment contracts, end the 15-minute visits, give them a decent minimum wage and pay them for travel time. We have got those people that can be recruited and trained and looked after. We also need to invest in healthcare at the point of need. I'm campaigning for a walk-in centre within Glossop because we might be getting a new urgent care centre at Tameside. Well, it's not new, it's the old walk-in centre at Ashton that's been moved to Tameside, but it means people have to get 2 buses to get there. It's very difficult for people in Glossop to be able to get there, so if we can have facilities that are already built, that are at George Street Clinic, all we need to do is use them. It shouldn't have to cost the earth, it won't cost the earth, but we're also going to reduce costs to the NHS by ending the privatisation and the compulsory tendering since 2012 that is costing so much more in managers within the NHS, within the budgets, and in producing generic medicines, because our medicine bill for the NHS is expanding rapidly. If we do a deal with the USA, then they want longer patent times for their drugs companies, and that will increase the cost of our drugs. We want to keep that down with generic medicines, but also investing in the staff, in the nurses whose bursaries they desperately need, also without having fees for the courses that they have to undertake now, and supporting doctors and particularly staff in mental health, which we're seeing such a huge lack of here, particularly in Glossop. And also obviously supporting primary care for mental health, because those counselling sessions and proper long-term sustainable support for people with mental health conditions is so important. It doesn't need very high levels of training, but it's critical to bring down those people, the numbers of people that come into crisis.
Yep, Robert, for the Green Party.
This is part of the social debt that I talked about earlier. Now, one of the reasons for this is we do not have sustainable politics. We see a constant changing and constant polarisation between the two main parties that are always fighting these marginal seats, swapping from one side to the other. And because we don't have this sustainability in politics, this is where we get the misfunding and mismanagement of our systems that need to be sustainable systems. These need to be in the long term, and we have to think about in the long term. Now, the current structure of the NHS is mismanaged and underfunded. Money is being poured into these centralised services, and at one of these other hustings we spoke with a nurse who said, we're not underfunded, we have so much money we don't know what to do with it. The issue there is that people are coming in with sniffles, with little things that they should be going to their GPs, but our local services are just underfunded. They just don't exist a lot of the time. That is why we need to decentralise these services. We need to bring care back to the community, and we need to get the community investing in their local services. We can create local jobs and support nurses and practitioners within the local communities so that they can be part of that system, because that is the only way we can take the pressure off them and build our NHS stronger. We need sustainability throughout every aspect of the whole economy. Thank you.
Okay. Robert Largan.
Yeah. The NHS is very important to me personally. It's saved my life twice, and I will always fight to defend it. But to answer the question directly, which was about how are we going to actually deliver those extra staff numbers, several things that need to be done. First of all, a new Conservative government will open 5 new medical schools. Secondly, we'll set up new visas to bring in the skilled doctors and nurses from overseas that we need in the meantime. Thirdly, we will give doctors a pay increase of 2.5%. We'll give nurses, midwives and cleaners in the NHS a 6.5% pay increase. But all 4 of us here want more staff in the NHS. We want more funding in the NHS. The $1 million question is, or I should say the $1 billion question is, how are we going to pay for it? And that's the only way we're going to pay for it is by having a strong economy that's going to keep growing. And who's got that credible plan? And there's a few things I want you to think about when it comes to the NHS. How are we going to cope with that staffing? How are we going to have an NHS which can afford to work in the future? The Labour plan to nationalise pharmaceuticals That's going to have a chilling impact on research in drug development in this country. It'd be a very bad thing for this country. Secondly, what would the impact be of Labour hiking tax massively on all doctors? And thirdly, what would be the impact on the NHS and its staffing requirements of Labour's 4-day week? That's what we need to think about when it comes to funding the NHS and delivering a health service for everyone.
Thank you. Okay, can I just thank all the candidates so far for keeping broadly within 2 minutes for your replies. It's much appreciated because, as I said, we've got a lot to get through. I'd like to get you to answer the next question a little bit quicker, 20 seconds or so. And it's a question, I believe, from the youngest member of our audience over there, Niall Burlinson. Niall, can you remember your question? Just wait for the microphone to come to you. Unfortunately, Niall doesn't have a vote in this election, but he does have a voice. He does tonight.
Would you consider extending the B line for young people in Derbyshire?
An important question about subsidised public transport for young people, particularly to get around a huge area like this. I'm going to start with Ruth George.
Okay, thank you. I mean, you may have seen, Niall, that the current Conservative County Council are looking to get rid of the B-line cards next year. I'm campaigning against that. Labour's policy is for free bus fares for everyone under 25, so I would abolish the B-line card, but I'd give you free bus fares instead. In the meantime, I'm working with Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, to get the one card for free public transport in Manchester extended to students in High Peak.
Robert, from the Green Party.
Of course, I personally think that all public transport should be free at the point of use for everybody. I think if we're going to tackle this climate crisis, we need to completely incentivise, and if people already pay through their taxes and subsidise that, then it becomes unaffordable to be using these private vehicles, and that'll make everyone's situation better. So yes, thank you.
Okay, Robert Largan.
Keep this very short. Yes.
Okay, can you be even shorter than that, David? You don't have to be. Maybe
No,
maybe
a little bit
some
longer
time.
than that. Yeah, I'd certainly support it. I'd also want more public transport available. As I've said in previous hustings, I'd like to see transport hubs so that we have bus services which support our residential areas, feed into our trains, so that actually makes public transport accessible for people.
Okay, thank you. I'd now like to invite Patricia Irwin to ask her question. Patricia, are you down here at the front? Yeah.
Should be done about the need for affordable housing in the High Peak?
The question was about affordable housing in the High Peak, and I'm going to invite Robert from the Green Party to answer that question first.
So I think under the last government, only 8% of properties in the High Peak that have been built were provided at an affordable rate, and even those houses are not affordable. Now, the thing that we need to do is we need to build more social housing, and I think it literally comes down to that. We're having the wrong houses built in the wrong locations that are putting pressures on our whole system. We're losing our ability to go to the GP and get appointments. Our roads are becoming blocked up. We need sustainable housing, and we need that to be done for the benefit of everyone. Thank you.
Okay, Robert Largan.
Yeah, there's an awful lot that needs to be done in this area. Several things that are really desperately needed is reforms to shared ownership to get it working properly for everyone. Another thing that we need is to continue the Help to Buy scheme to make it easier for people to get on the housing ladder. We also want to keep the Right to Buy scheme so those who are living in council housing, to give them the chance to own their home as well. But when it comes to homes, the other question is, where are we going to build them? And that's the controversial part. Everyone's in favour of homes, but it's about where are you going to build them? And making certain that you have the infrastructure and public services in place to cope with them. One of the things which has been a big concern is how many extra homes we're getting, particularly in Glossopdale, when we still have the desperate need to have the bypass built, when there's not been enough places where we are right now at Glossopdale School. So that's the essential part of this. Yes to housing, but it's got to be done in the right places with local support, and we need that infrastructure in place to cope with it. And we need to help people get on the property ladder too.
David Lomax.
Changes brought in by the Conservative government in the last few years have actually made it much harder to
Yes, sorry, I'm just agreeing.
Right.
I
much
was gonna say
harder
exactly the same.
to actually have affordable homes. The planning committee says there has to be a certain percentage. A developer will come back along and say, oh, we can't afford it. And also then the rules change and they don't have to provide the affordable homes which the local plan said they had to. It's a great shame. We should be providing them. The problem with High Peak, of course, is there is so little land you can actually build in because most of it is kinder and you're not going to be building houses on top of kinder. So you are forced to build in Glossop or Chapel or Buxton, basically. And they have seen far more development than I would have hoped we would have. But unfortunately, a target was set, basically by government, of how many houses we had to have in High Peak, 3,000 odd over the period of the local plan. Certainly, I would like to see the council, if it has land available, as has happened in Buxton, going to social housing providers and saying, will you have that site and will you build social housing on that site? So we have a site which was given permission a couple of weeks ago for 71 social housing units. The sad thing is we are not making them to the standard I would hope we would be. They should be sustainably built so that they are low energy use. We should be making the most of those sites. I would personally have put more on those sites than the 71 because if we have a site as a council, we should be a beacon for that, like happened in, I'm sure many of you have seen it in Norwich, where the council estate there, they have no energy costs because their buildings are so energy friendly. That's what I would like to be seeing. So they're not only producing social housing, affordable housing, but housing which is not then going to cost residents who live in them.
Okay, thank you very much. Ruth George.
Thank you very much. And affordable housing in High Peak is something I've been campaigning on for a long time. In Glossop, we're particularly seeing a housing shortage with rents going up, with landlords buy-to-let landlords buying up a lot of the new properties that are being built, and rents are now far exceeding the local housing allowance. So where people are on low pay or on benefits and are trying to afford somewhere to live, they simply can't do it. And that's creating some huge problems in Glossop, people having to make up the difference in their rent and ending up with just £20 a week to get by on. That's an absolute disgrace, but it's meaning that a lot of our country's wealth is going to landlords, going to ever-expanding housing costs. So we need to be able to build the houses that we want. Labour has a plan to do that, for councils to be able to compulsory purchase the land that is in the best place possible for it, for us to have 50% of the homes that are built to be affordable, so that's up to 100,000 a year by 2024, and for another 50,000 to be from housing associations. At the moment, as David says, we can't oppose planning not only of the number of affordable homes. I tried to get 50% affordable homes in Chapel, where I wrote the neighbourhood plan housing section. But we also can't oppose development on greenfield sites where it's not appropriate. And that's down to the 2012 Conservative government's planning laws. So it's a little disingenuous of Robert, unless he's going to change the Conservatives' laws, to say that we shouldn't be doing that. We should have a decent costed plan, which the Labour Party have, to have both the number of social homes that we need, but also to make those of a higher environmental standard and to cut the costs of housing so that everyone can afford to live. Thank you.
Thank you. Just having a senior moment. Have you all answered that question, or have I missed someone out?
No, we don't. Haven't you
Yeah,
started?
yeah,
You started in. Very good. Thank you. Great. My next question. I'm going to ask Anthony Doyle to address the elephant in the room. Anthony, you remember your question? Just wait for the microphone because we're broadcasting, so we need to project.
Hi. So clearly Brexit has split the country, and this general election, regardless of what anyone wants to say otherwise, will be massively important to most voters. So we know what to expect from the Tories, the Lib Dems, the Brexit Party and the Greens. But from Labour, obviously, it's been more complicated. Corbyn continues to sit on the fence. But however, what he is saying, to be fair to him, is Labour Party will negotiate a better deal if they win the election. That better deal, obviously, will be a very, very soft Brexit, yeah? Single market, customs union, etc. But my problem with that is, that's fine, because that's your position. But then you want to offer a referendum to the UK to offer only two options, which is Remain or a very, very soft Brexit. Surely that's massively disingenuous to all the Leave voters in the country, and specifically in the High Peak.
Okay, so a question on Brexit. Now, I'm going to slightly change the running order because I think the question is very, very clearly direct to Labour's policy. So I'm going to have to Ruth George to answer it first of all. But also I'm going to put a bit of pressure on the other parties on their Brexit policy as well. But if Ruth George can have the first opportunity to answer Anthony's question.
Thank you very much, Anthony, and it's really good to be able to set out our clear policy on Brexit, which is that we have, as we set out in our 2017 manifesto, that we negotiate a Brexit deal that protects jobs and protects our economy. Because nobody that I speak to in High Peak voted for some of our manufacturing industry to go, some of our high-tech industry, who would have, if they have different regulations in this country, they simply cannot manufacture here and also export to countries that want to see those European regulations in place. That's currently around 50% of our export trade. That's what our industry is geared up for. So that's what we need to protect at this moment. So that's the deal that we'll negotiate. It's largely been done in the cross-party talks with Theresa May's government after her deal was rejected for the third time, because that was just a temporary deal, as Boris Johnson's is. And that's actually the slogan, Get Brexit Done, is one of the least open and transparent statements that are going around this election. It simply means a temporary deal up until the end of next year, and then we face a possible cliff edge yet again of a no deal or being able to do a permanent trade deal. So Labour will negotiate that permanent deal based on the cross-party talks, which the EU have said that they're in favour of because it assists us all to have our trade. And within 3 months after that, to have a referendum on it so people can choose between the two options. We will be ready with a deal, ready to go immediately if that's what people still want to go ahead with. But I can't put my hand on my heart and vote to end people's jobs in High Peak and to put their livelihoods at stake. We've all seen the impact on the economy that the Conservative hard Brexit plans are proposing, from every independent economic observer as saying that that will hit our economy. If we're going to invest in our public services again, if we're going to prevent poverty and invest in our infrastructure to really grow our economy and have a better country, then we can't have a hard Brexit. That's why I've always been very clear about the fact that we want a Brexit that keeps the customs union so we don't have the tariffs, not just with the EU, but with the 168 other countries that we also benefit from beneficial trade deals with, and we can move on from those arguments and just get on with investing in the things that we need to on the best possible basis.
Okay, I'm going to call time. Now, Robert, you said in your opening statement that Brexit was unimportant. What the Green Party's line on it is you want a second referendum. You're initially part of a Remain alliance here in High Peak, just to further muddy the waters that Anthony's question mentioned.
So our position is that we would campaign to Remain. That doesn't mean that we would have a choice. We don't think that British politics is representative. We have a voting system that runs under first past the post, and that means that these major parties can't represent us, and that is why they haven't been able to represent us in the government. So our position is we need to put all of the options on the table. We need it to be as open to the people as possible. We need democracy. And we don't have that at the moment. So we are pushing for democracy. Thank you.
Whoa. Yeah. We haven't got time to keep bouncing back at every question. I hear what you say. Robert Largan. Get Brexit done? I mean, is that it? Is that the...
Nope.
It's only the beginning, surely, though, isn't it?
Yep. Shall I answer that?
Please.
Look, if we're going to get Brexit done, what does that mean? It means there being a majority Conservative government which can pass the deal. That means that we legally leave the EU by the 31st of January. It avoids a cliff edge, so there will be a transition period while we negotiate a permanent free trade deal, both with Europe and with the rest of the world. That is a sensible way of delivering what people voted for in 2016, taking back control of our laws, ending the jurisdiction of the European courts, taking control of our borders, stopping sending billions over to the EU every year. That is what the deal would deliver. Now, I think it's worth remembering what Ruth said at the last election in the Hustings, where she said another referendum would be even more divisive than the first, and that it would leave voters feeling betrayed. I agree with Ruth in 2017 when she said that. And to consider Labour's policy, which is to negotiate, as the question said, a Brexit deal where you'd stay in the customs union. I'm talking as someone who, in the referendum, voted Remain personally. That would be the worst of both worlds. Being in the customs union would mean we'd have to take EU regulations while having no say on how they're made, and we'd have no right to make trade deals with the rest of the world. It would be the worst of both worlds and would be a ridiculous proposal to put that and Remain back to the British public. We have to get this done. This has caused such problems with our democracy. It's the loss of faith in our politics is driven largely from this. We need to get a small Conservative majority government delivered on the 12th of December so we can pass this deal, get this resolved, and then move on to tackling the other big issues that our country faces. That's it.
Now, David Lomax, the Liberal Democrat policy was until quite recently before the election for a second referendum. That's what you campaigned for during the European elections earlier this year. Now it's for straight hard revoke in the event of a Liberal Democrat majority government. Do you stand by that personally as well?
Yes, if we had 325 Liberal Democrat MPs, which had given us a majority, I think that would have been a fairly resounding vote for Remain. I don't think we're going to get that. So I would certainly support the stance that we have a second referendum when we actually know what the deal is. I think if we do have a deal in Brexit, it's going to be bad for this country. It's going to be bad for industry. It's going to be bad for our public services because we won't attract the people to work in them. We're already seeing that farmers are struggling to bring in the crops in Lancashire and the East Anglia. Today they were showing a leek farmer who's lost, I think, something like a third of his people coming from abroad to pick the leeks. So often we've seen food going to waste in fields because there isn't that labour there who will actually pick it. That's just one of the things that's happening because of the fear of Brexit. Never mind what will happen when we actually do have Brexit.
Okay, thank you very much for all of you. I'm now going to ask Joe Marsh to ask his question. Oh, sat next to him. That was not stage managed. It wasn't for the convenience of passing the microphone along either. Yeah, Joe Marsh.
Thank you. So, Ruth, it's probably more directed to you. And I just want to know, with the planned, and in my view, obscene amount of spending that Labour plan to do, how do you plan on doing that without impacting each and every family negatively in the UK?
I mean, I think you have to look at all the parties' spending proposals. The Labour Party hasn't simply proposed that we spend money, we've proposed that we raise it as well, which, if you look at the Conservatives' policies, which the IFS has deemed to be not credible either, they're telling you that they're going to spend, but not that they're going to raise taxes. So we've been credible about it, but looking at who can bear the burden best. We've had large companies which have seen, with profits over £1.5 million a year, which have had their corporation tax almost halved. It was going to have been halved from 34% down to 17%. Those companies, as I said at the start, have seen their tax bills slashed. That money is going to shareholders. We've seen people on incomes over £80,000 a year have seen their income tax slashed. What we will do is put that up by 5% and then by 10% for incomes over £125,000 a year. These are people who can afford it. Doctors, if you've got a consultant who's on £125,000 a year and you're asking them to pay £30 a week more in tax, that's somebody who can afford it. They're not going to leave the country because of it, but what they will get is a decent NHS to work in. They will get better schools for their children with lower class sizes, support for children with special educational needs, and we will see the police force that we need and deserve back again. These are things that have been reversed in the last 9 years. It's not that we had a country that wasn't working up until the global financial crash. We did. We had a country that worked, that paid our dues and invested in our public services. We've seen 9 years of austerity. Our public services have gone to pot. Unfortunately, our government is failing them, and we are more likely to grow our economy and to keep people here if they can guarantee a decent standard of services, if they're not having to walk past homeless people in the street when they go to work.
Robert Hodgett-Haley from the Green Party.
We should all pay to support our society, and I think that's quite reasonable of an approach. What we put in is what we get out, and as a society, I think the way we work together benefits all of us, and I think by putting money into things like nationalisation of certain services, we can all get more out. Now, the Green Party's policy is to essentially put in a universal basic income, and that would mean that every single person would get a certain amount. So the impact on everyone of putting these services and all these tax hikes, they wouldn't be felt by the worst in the people at the bottom of our society who are struggling. And so that money would be gained from the top and not from the bottom. And we need that society that puts back into itself, and it needs to be balanced so that it can be sustainable. Thank you.
Okay. Robert Largan.
To answer the question, no, the Labour can't credibly say that, as the IFS have said that their proposals would mean big tax increases, including for those on average incomes. And to respond to something which Ruth said, which is the Conservatives aren't raising any taxes, they've not said that. That's not true. We've increased capital gains tax. We've increased stamp duty, and we've cancelled the proposed reduction in corporation tax to put that money back into our public services. And also, it's just worth... Well,
let him have his say.
To respond to those shouting out, we have reduced corporation tax, and what's happened to corporation tax receipts? They've gone up massively. What's better? Making businesses pay more in tax, but taking less tax receipts from them, or encouraging investment, encouraging entrepreneurship, bringing in that investment so that our tax receipts go up and we can put that money back into public services. And that's what we've done. And that's what we're going to continue to do. But we can only continue to fund our public services properly if we keep our economy growing. And we don't want to be seeing big tax increases on people on average incomes. That's why we're doing the opposite. We've taken the lowest paid out of income tax altogether. We're giving people an increase in the minimum wage, and now we're going to be cutting their national insurance contributions too. That's what we need to be doing.
Okay, thank you. David Lomax from the Liberal Democrats.
Well, unashamedly, we said we would actually raise taxes, because if we raise taxes and we can actually do something for the NHS by saying we'll put a penny on the tax and it is ring-fenced for the National Health Service and social care, we think people will actually see what it's for and feel that it is worth it. We've also said we'll raise corporation tax up to 20%. So to come back to your actual question, no, I don't think Labour have got their taxes sorted out. I think it will impact them more. We were a credible tax raise as far as the Institute of Fiscal Studies were concerned.
Okay, is that your final answer?
Yep.
Yeah, very good. I'm going to ask our next question from David Hartington. David Hartington, could you identify yourself? Chap there in the green jumper. I've been dying to say the lady with the hat, but there isn't a lady with a hat at the back. David Hartington, your question, please.
Hello. My question's more directed at a national level. Okay. Now, the primary responsibility of a Prime Minister and a government is the defence of the nation. How, this is for each of you, do you propose to defend this nation going forward? We've all heard different policies, but some clarity as to what each of your leaders, who will be a potential Prime Minister, what their view is, and also as a government, generally the policy of who will take ministerial roles. So just a general government policy as to what defence will be. Now, what I mean by defence is not just potential crystal ball future attacks against us in whatever way, but it's also defence at a lower level, people on the streets with all the crime that we have, and other sort of different matters that may cause distress or harm to citizens on an individual basis.
Okay, I think it's Robert Largan's turn to go first. Question about defence and policing.
Well, when it comes to defence, we have to properly fund our armed forces, and the Conservative government is committed to properly funding our armed forces, to keeping the NATO commitment for how much we will spend on our armed forces, which is absolutely vital. We also need to look after our servicemen and women, treat them properly when they're serving and once they have retired. That's why the creation of a new office for veteran affairs is absolutely vital, long overdue, and we need to do an awful lot more. I'm also pleased to see the government signing up to the military covenant to look after those people too. Absolutely essential. There's also the question of our national security when it comes to our nuclear deterrent. We're crystal clear on this. We need to keep a nuclear deterrent. The Labour Party are in a complete and utter mess on that position. I'll let Ruth answer that one for herself. And when it comes to police, yeah, we need to recruit more police officers. 20,000 planned, 85 for Derbyshire Constabulary next year. We need to make certain that we get the fair share of them up at this end of the county too. And that's what I'll be doing.
Robert Hodgett-Haley from the Green Party.
I personally think that the climate crisis is one of the biggest threats that we're facing at the moment. And I think the issue is if we don't tackle that, we're going to have further pressures on our armed forces. We need to take responsibility for our foreign affairs and how we go about. So if we keep attacking countries and providing arms to other countries, and if we sort of keep a nuclear arsenal, we become a target. We become a target for these things. We become a target for terrorist attacks. And we're going to have so much net migration from people moving from these countries. That's what we're seeing because we don't take responsibility for our national position in terms of how we use our army and our armed forces. Now, I think our armed forces are really important. They are. You can't replace them. But I think we need to be using them to protect the environment. And we need to be funding them so that they can do that. And that's my position on that. Thank you.
Okay, Bruce George.
Thank you very much. The Labour Party's position is perfectly clear. We will keep our nuclear deterrent, renew Trident, but we will also seek to advance the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is an international treaty that simply hasn't been accorded to, and people haven't taken a serious look at reducing nuclear weapons. I don't think anybody could argue that we all need to try and do that to keep our world a safer place. Closer to home, then I see too many army veterans who have got mental health problems, still physical health problems that aren't being treated because they aren't getting the support they need from specialist services within the NHS once they're discharged from military hospital, and they're not getting the support for post-traumatic stress disorder that so many of our veterans suffer from. That's why we absolutely need to make sure that we've got a decent health service and decent mental health services for everyone, but that with the Armed Forces Covenant operating within that to make sure that those specialist services are available everywhere. In Manchester, we saw PTSD services come for people who'd been in the Manchester bombing, but that those weren't available to veterans who'd been serving in Afghanistan. It was absolute disgrace that that's not made that there are services, but they're just not made available to our veterans. So I've been supporting them much of the time. With our police, we've lost 307 police officers across Derbyshire in the last 9 years, over 400 police support staff, including the PCSOs and the staff that help keep the police from having to do paperwork. So all we're going to see is 85 put back in the next year. We've had the Police and Crime Commissioner having to raise our council taxes, make those even more expensive for people in order to put in the 120 police and police staff that are needed at the very bare minimum. The Conservative Party won't even bring our numbers of police officers for Derbyshire back up to the level that it was in 2010. We in the Labour Party will do that and make sure that our police can be used most effectively with police support staff as well, that sometimes can do a more effective job than police officers with the power to arrest.
Okay,
but
Ruth,
we'll also invest in the youth services to keep crime reduced.
Okay, that's enough. David Lomax from the Liberal Democrats.
Just picking up Ruth's last point, yes, I was going to start at that level and then go up to the armed services. We were prepared to put 500 million into youth services because that is where the first problems with crime actually start. If there's nothing for people to do, then they will dwindle towards the crime. So that is important, and providing the facilities back into Derbyshire, which have been cut so badly, will hopefully have an impact there. We'd also put extra police into our extra money into our police, £1 billion, which would provide police officers that you can actually see, who are around, because that's a deterrent in itself, actually knowing that the police are here. We'd also put money into our prison services, so that when people are in prison, they don't just get into that situation where they learn more skills there that are going to help them with their crime, but they actually learn some training and education and work skills which will hopefully stop them going back into crime when they come back out. And we would support continuing the 2% NATO budget. I'd also like to see our armed services, and we are actually struggling to keep or to get people into our armed services. I would like to see our armed services used not just for conflict abroad, but also, as we've seen in recent weeks, going out and helping with floods, going out helping with emergencies. We shouldn't be afraid of asking them to come along and be using their skills, which they have learnt to use for war, but to also use for peaceful purposes and putting up the flood defences.
I think we've seen that locally, haven't we? Right, we've reached 8 o'clock, ladies and gentlemen. I did want to run this to time because it is being broadcast on Facebook Live. I'm going to invite Peter Gaskell to ask his last question. Peter, are you here?
Yes.
Oh, you're here. Look, you just wait for a microphone, please, Peter. But what I want to do is just listen to Peter's question, and then I want you to, you've got a minute, basically, each of you, to make it part of your closing statements, because I think it's very important to what we've tried to do tonight. Peter, have you got the microphone?
I wrote the question just after I got up from the light shift, so I'm more than happy for you to read it out in its entirety in front of you. Thank you.
Okay. What would each candidate do to reunite the country after the election? And of course, reunite the High Peak if it's been a divided place as well. And I think we're back round to you, aren't we, Robert Hodgley-Haley from the Green Party?
It's Hodgetts-Haley.
Hodgetts-Haley, yes.
One of the things that I've noticed is we've got a complete polarisation in politics. We've got these two parties fighting it to be the most opposite and to try and get these marginal voters. And I think if we're going to really reunite everyone, we need a politics that represents the people, and we don't have that. We need proportional representation so that we can get things done. Because all we're seeing is ever polarising policies that are making things worse and worse on each side, and it's not responding to the people of the UK. So if we're going to bring ourselves back together, we need to put politics back in the hands of the people. And I think one of the things is the two big parties are afraid of putting proportional representation to the people because that puts the power in the hands of the people and not in the hands of the parties. Thank you.
Thank you. Ruth George.
Thank you very much. And the first thing we need to do to bring our country together is to make our economy and our society fairer. We've seen polarisation and a growing divide between the richest in our country and the poorest. People who are struggling going to food banks, seeing people who are incredibly wealthy having more and more. And that's what the Labour manifesto has at its heart. A manifesto for the many, not the few who benefit at the moment. Something that will benefit people from the bottom, those who are most vulnerable and the poorest, as well as ordinary working people on stagnating low wages, seeing their costs rising day after day. It's no wonder that people feel disillusioned with politics, because this is what it's delivered over the last 9 years, alongside public services being failed, lack of investment in our infrastructure. So we need a fairer economy. We need to have politics that reflects what people feel. We don't want to be taken out of the European Union on a hard Brexit that nobody voted for, with no choice about it, and fairer politics with AV.
Okay, David Lomax from the Liberal Democrats.
I'd like to see more decentralised decision-making, giving more power to local government so people actually can have some influence on what is happening locally and feel they're more involved. So I'd also like to see an income stream for local government, perhaps a local income tax. Certainly I would be supporting proportional representation, and we should be supporting our electorate so they are more educated and more empowered to distinguish between the facts and the lies that we have. I've said at previous hustings that I would have liked to see all manifestos out by a certain date so they can be scrutinised. And I did say this before, that they were scrutinised by the Institute of Fiscal Studies, who I'm glad to say have now done the Labour, Conservative and Liberal Democrats and decided which one was the best from their point of view. I think that should be something that we are forced to do. And I'd also make sure that all leaders have to go to the leaders' debate and face questioning and face the public rather than hiding away.
Thank you. Robert Largan.
Yeah, if we're going to reunite the country, then first of all, I think we need to remember how to compromise, which is something we seem to have forgotten over the last few years. But what has been the most divisive thing over the last 3.5 years? It's quite simple. It's Brexit and the fact that this has been going on and on and on, and people feel that what they voted for has not been delivered on. So the only way we're going to reunite the country is by getting this resolved, by passing the deal, getting Brexit delivered, and then we can get on with delivering the things which people really want to see happen, like getting a new urgent care centre at Tameside, like building the bypass finally, like getting more school places and tackling climate change. Now look, there's been lots of really good ideas talked about tonight, lots of lovely suggestions, but none of that can happen until Brexit is resolved, because otherwise we're just going to keep going round and round in circles. Please, we have to make certain that we get this resolved before we can ever reunite as a country and then tackle the other challenges facing us.
Thank you.
So, think long and hard, and vote Conservative on the 12th of December. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for coming along to this hustings tonight. Thank you to all the candidates for playing fair and answering the questions to the best of their abilities and not going over time too much. Well, all of you. And thank you as well for submitting such great questions. I'm sorry I didn't have the opportunity to get through all of the questions. Some of them may have been covered by other people. There was obviously lots of questions about Brexit, lots of questions about the NHS. But I think we've covered a good range of national, international, and of course, important to you, local issues. So please join me in thanking all the team at Quest Media who've put on this event, all the team at Glossopdale School for hosting us here today. And don't forget to buy your copy of the Glossop Chronicle and tune into Tameside FM 103.6 FM. I've been Michael Taylor. I've enjoyed hosting this, and these have been your candidates. Cast your vote in 2 weeks' time.